Hey class, it's Professor Rourke. Okay, so I know 2.1 is a lot of information. It's sort of a crash course in some ways on StatCrunch. And then also part of the tricky part is a lot of rounding, a lot of decimals, a lot of percents, all those things. So um, I had some good questions, and this is a type of example that would work well to explain and show some different options. Okay, so first things first, it says a frequency table of grades has 5 classes, A, B, C, D, and F. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit because it's a little hard to see. Okay, with frequencies 2, 14, 5, and 2, respectively. And then you'll notice also there is a little blue square hyperlink that says click to copy table. So we can do that if we want to, and we'll talk some more about that as well. It says using percentages, what are the relative frequencies of the 5 classes? So a couple things that are going on here. We have essentially 5 qualitative like categories, right? A, B, C, D, and F, and they already have a frequency table for us. They've already sort of like added them together. We don't have the raw data, right? So we don't have a list of all of these grades like A, B, C, all those things. We don't have that. Okay, it's already summarized for us. So let's talk about some options. Option 1 would be to go, even though I know we did a big crash course in StatCrunch. Option 1 is to actually do this by hand, which isn't terrible. And there's some good and bad of both. So some people always just sort of prefer to do this by hand, which is totally fine. So first things first, you're going to add up the total. Okay, so you're going to add up 2 plus 14 plus 15 plus 5 plus 2. And when I say by hand, like you can use your graphing calculator, right? You don't have to actually do this in your head. But if you add those together, I believe that comes out to be 38. Okay, so 38 is our total. And then we go through and have to divide each frequency by the total. The other part that's a little tricky here is they tell us to round to 2 decimal places, and we have to turn it into a percent. So a lot of going on there. So for instance, the first group, if I divide 2 by 38, I'm going to go ahead and write it out first as of the decimal, and it's kind of ugly, I'm not going to lie. It's 0.05263, and I'll just go out one more, 2. Okay, you might be like, why did she write so many decimal places? It says to round to 2 decimal places. And that's a good question. But we are talking, they're saying round to 2 decimal places once we've turned it into a percent. So a lot of that random decimal and review section, that review back in the first section that we do, would come into play here. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to take this decimal and multiply by 100, or you can also think about it as moving the decimal place 2 times. It's totally up to you. Okay. So if you have a calculator and you want to multiply by 100, that's great. If you just want to think about physically moving the decimal place, that works as well. And if we do that for this first one, for instance, we get 5.2632. Okay. And then we take this number and round it to 2 decimals, right? So it's not bad, but it's kind of tedious, right? Like that's sort of a lot of steps, and that's just one of the answers. Okay, so the first for A, there's only, oh, that's kind of sad. There's only 5.26% of all grades are A's. Okay, and then we would just repeat that process. Okay, so for instance, for B's, it's 14. So if we divided 14 by 38, took that number and multiplied it by 100 or moved the decimal place, however you want to think of it, we should get 36 0.842, which rounded would just be 36.84, right? So we would just do that. And then would have to do that 3 more times. Okay, so that's option 1, which I'm going to refer to as doing by hand. I'm sorry, 36.84. Or like when I say by hand, it's also still like using your calculator to kind of crunch these numbers out. Okay, let's talk about how we could do this in StatCrunch as well. So I'm going to go ahead and clear off what I wrote here. and show you some options. So sometimes we have to kind of like work StatCrunch in our favor if we want to go this route. And sometimes people will find it to be worth it. Sometimes we might just be like, you know what, this is easier if I just do this by hand. So like, for instance, when I open this data table up, you'll notice that it's actually only one column. So the problem is, like if we tried to do stat tables frequency, right? Like we kind of did the other times where in this raw data, you'll see it's not correct. Okay. They are thinking that this is the raw data. And that is the one drawback that I have never quite figured out why StatCrunch. I mean, I get it, but I don't. The table option and making a relative frequency table option is only helpful if it's raw data. If it's already summarized for us, we kind of have to do a little bit of trickery to get the numbers out if we want to use it. Okay, so that's problem number one, is the data is already summarized for us in a frequency table. So we can't make another frequency table because it's already in a frequency table. Okay, the other problem for this particular one is they actually, in a frequency table, we should have a column for like the categories and a column for the frequency. But you'll know just for this particular one, and I think this is really kind of the only one out of all of StatCrunch, so I just want to make sure we talked about it, is they have just one column for the frequency. They didn't give us a column for the categories, and we need that really if we're going to do our little with like for all of them, we need two columns. We need the category and the frequency. That's what makes a frequency table, right? So you have some options. And again, I love to carry the data over, especially when it's raw data. But in theory, I could go ahead and I'm going to fix this so I can use some of the tricks that I need. Again, this is only really, I think, this problem where they don't copy over the first column, like the grade, but it's fine. We got it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just actually fix this up so I can show you some of the tricks that we can use. And so the way I'm going to fix this is I'm going to actually just make the first column A, B, C, D, F, and then I'm going to make the second column 2, 14, 15, 5, 2. So it looks more like an actual frequency table. Does this make sense? So a frequency table usually has like the group or the category on one column and then the frequency on the right. But the weird part about this particular problem, and I think it's because it comes from a different textbook. Whenever it has an asterisk, that means it comes from a different textbook. So sometimes it just like is a little funky. We kind of have to just like think it through. So anyways, okay. So after we do that, again, option one is to do it by hand. So if you don't feel like messing with it, that's fine. But once we do have this as a summarized table, again, the problem is we can't make a frequency table when it's already in a frequency table on StatCrunch. I wish there was like a way that only works for raw data. So what we have to do is just kind of work around that. There's two options. We can make a bar plot from the data because we have the option to click with summary. And we also could make a pie chart with the data because we have the option to click with summary. So you can pick either one. The bar plot, just to give you an idea, is going to give you the decimal of this, and then the pie chart is going to give it to you as a percent. And since they want a percent, I'm kind of leaning towards pie chart, but I'm just going to show you both ways just to kind of give you an idea. Again, this just want to make sure this makes sense. This is how you can sort of get around the problem when they already give you a frequency table and they want us to then turn it to a relative frequency table and we don't have the raw data. Okay, it's already summarized for us. So option one is to do it by hand. Option two is to either make a bar plot or a pie chart. So I'm going to show you bar plot first. So bar, because it just comes first. So instead of going to stat, we go to graph. And then we're going to go ahead and go right to bar plot, which is the first one here. And then I'm going to go ahead and click with summary because that's the key is the data is already in a frequency table. It's already summarized for us that they've like tallied them up. Okay, and so we just want to get the relative frequencies out. Okay, so we say categories in, that was the first column. That was just like A, B, C, D, F, right? And then the count in, variable 2, those are the frequency. Okay, and then I'm going to change it from frequency to relative frequency. You'll notice also I even have the option to do percent. So I'll just click relative frequency first, just so you can see it. I'll click value above bar, and I'll go ahead and click compute. So when you click value above bar, sometimes you have to just actually like expand it out a little bit. And you'll see they have the decimals rounded to 3 decimals, which is fine, but technically we want a percent and we want it to 2 decimals. So a percent rounded to 2 decimals is actually like 4 decimals, if that makes sense. If you have it as a actual, if you want to take the decimal to a percent. I'll also go ahead and I'll click edit and try percent just so you can kind of see that. And when they have it this way, they have the percent, but again, the problem just is that they don't have it rounded the way we want it. If you scroll your mouse over top of the bars, you'll see they actually give you the whole number. So you could just round that. Okay, so for instance, I scrolled over for A and it says percent 5.2631579. And if we round it, that's 5.26, which is the same thing we got from our calculator, right? So that's one option, okay, is to actually make a bar plot out of it. The other option is a pie chart. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to graph, I'm going to go to pie chart, and then I'm going to click with summary, same vibes, where category in is the first column, and then the count is just the frequency column. So I'm going to put variable 1 and then variable 2, and then it says display count and percent of total. I'm just going to leave that selected. Okay, and so this way actually for this particular type of problem, because it asks for percents, we could just copy this straight down because it says A is 5.26, B is 36.84. Yay, I did that right. If I would have kept going by hand, I would have gotten 39.47. For D, I got 13.16. And for F, I got 5.26. Okay, and then it says again, rounded to decimal places, and that's what the pie chart already does. Okay, the pie chart will give you the relative frequencies as a percent rounded to 2 decimals. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a few options of things you could try if the data is already added up for you and you're asked to make a relative frequency. So for instance, just quickly looking at question number 14, very similar, okay? Instead, they have talking about the color candies, and there's a frequency of each. There's brown, yellow, red, orange, green, and blue. And again, it's already pretty much like tallied up for us. This is the frequency table, and they just want the relative frequency table. So option 1, do this by hand, right? Where you just total them up and then divide each one, and then you have to round each one. So it's a little bit, the tedious part, I think the most tedious part is this, like the rounding and making sure we have it correct. This time they do not want a percent, they just want a decimal rounded to 3 places. So if you want to try this in StatCrunch, this would be another good one where I would recommend the bar plot, because the bar plot is going to give the relative frequency to you in decimals rounded to 3 decimals. So that works out kind of well. Okay, so I copied it over into StatCrunch just by clicking the blue button. It fills in for me. Unlike the last time, again, that's just a weird one where it didn't give you the column for grade. I don't really know why they did that, but that's okay. So we have a column for the color and a column for the frequency, exactly what we want. So then we can go to graph, we can go to bar plot, and we can click with summary. So these are just ways to kind of like work this system, I'd say, and ways that we can make StatCrunch tell us. The other way, again, is just to add them up and divide them in your calculator and round them. But if you're not like a big fan of rounding, or you are just kind of prone to making mistakes with those sorts of things, then I would highly recommend just sort of like getting comfortable with using StatCrunch to kind of like get around that. Does that make sense? So I hope that was helpful. Oop, I forgot to click to display it on the table. You can also always, again, remember, you can always just like scroll over top of each bar to get the full amount, but I'm going to click value above bar because I'm just that lazy, and there are my numbers. So that works out really well. Okay. So I hope that was helpful. Again, I know that was sort of a lot. I get 2.1 and 2.2 are a lot because it's weird. Like a lot of it's a review of things like we've seen before, like we've seen bar graphs before, right? But the vocabulary is different. We've calculated decimals before, but the way we have to do it 6 times in a row is a bit much, right? StatCrunch is new. So I think that's the most overwhelming part of 2.1 is just like sort of the new vocabulary, the tediousness of doing it by hand, and the new steps in StatCrunch. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, please keep me posted. Remember, you can always send an Ask My Instructor question. You can always click View an Example. View an Example typically will show this how you do this by hand, okay? And then every now and then we have something called a text tech help question. Let me see if I can find one that has a tech help on it. It kind of depends what the type of problem is. No, none of those do. Sorry. I will see if I can find one. No, not that one either. There we go. Okay, but I don't know if it really would be helpful for this particular one. But if you see a tech help button, that usually would show you if there is a way to do this in StatCrunch, it would pop up here. My computer's also being slow, so I don't see anything at all. But that's going to be helpful throughout the class, and I'll remind you of that as well. Okay, thank you, class. Keep me posted. Take care.